She stepped off the train clutching his letters, only to learn he'd been buried 2 days before she arrived. No husband, no home. Just a stranger standing in the dusk, watching her with unreadable eyes, saying, "You came for a man who can't love you back, but maybe someone else can." But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The wind at the station smelled of dust, rust, and open country, a scent Anna Foster had never known, but one that somehow felt like a beginning. She stepped down from the train with a careful grace, not because she was delicate, but because she was carrying everything she owned, not just in the satchel pressed against her side, but in the thin stack of letters bound by blue twine in her hands. Her fingers curled tightly around them, not to keep them safe from slipping, but as if the inked words might dissolve into the Montana air if she loosened her grip. Her lavender dress, one she'd worn at her sister's wedding, then later to her father's funeral, caught in the wind and twisted around her legs. She smoothed it instinctively, out of habit more than vanity. She was long past worrying how she looked to strangers. What mattered now was what the letters had promised. Safety, warmth, companionship. Not fireworks, but a fire that didn't go out. Caleb's letters hadn't been grand. They were plain, like a man who knew what mattered. He wrote of baking bread and tending cattle, of silence at sunset and missing someone who would sit beside him, not speak, not entertain, just be. Anna had read them over and over by oil lamp light in her rented room above the dress shop back home. She had folded each one carefully into belief, but as the train hissed and pulled away, no one came to greet her. The platform emptied. The weight of her satchel grew heavier with each uncertain minute. A farmhand finally agreed to take her to the Whitmore place, his wagon rattling over cracked dirt roads, through country that rolled like the backs of sleeping giants. She kept her eyes fixed ahead, rehearsing the smile she'd give when she saw him. Caleb, with his gentle eyes and quiet laugh. Instead, she was greeted by silence. An open gate, a still house, and a gravestone, barely marked, tucked beneath a sycamore's long shadow. Her knees didn't buckle, but something inside her did. Quiet and sharp, like thread snapping. The letters shook in her hand, the ribbon unraveling. Her voice never rose. There were no tears, not yet. Only the slow, agonizing rearrangement of a dream into nothing. Then, a voice, steady, male. "You came all this way for a man who can't love you back." She turned. A man stood at the edge of the yard, tall, broad-shouldered, a weak stubble darkening his jaw, arms crossed over a faded denim shirt. "But maybe someone else can make it worth the journey." She didn't answer. She only looked down at the bundle in her hands, the love letters of a dead man, and wondered if she'd just stepped into the wrong story, or the one she was meant for all along. The wind off the prairie didn't whistle. It pressed. A quiet, persistent pressure that found its way through cracks in the wood and seams in the soul. Winter in Montana wasn't just weather. It was something that entered you, slow and patient, until it settled in your chest like a stone. And for Anna, that stone felt heavier with every passing day. Elijah Whitmore wasn't cruel. He wasn't unkind. But kindness, she was learning, wasn't always warmth. He moved through the house with the silent surety of a man who'd learned to rely on no one. When he spoke, his words were short, clipped like fence wire. If Caleb's letters had painted pictures, Elijah's presence was a blank canvas, thick, untouched, impossible to read. Still, she tried. Not out of obligation, but because she needed to matter. She swept the floors, wiped the windows, baked biscuits that went untouched for days. She kept the books neatly organized, even though Elijah never asked. Not once did he thank her, but not once did he ask her to stop. He let her exist in the house like a ghost, visible, useful, never welcome. In town, they stopped pretending to whisper. Women at the Mercantile looked at her as if she were a sad story waiting to unfold. "Poor thing," she once heard behind her back. "Imagine traveling all that way just to end up a stranger in a dead man's house." The words were sharp, not with malice, but with pity. And pity, Anna found, was colder than the wind. Sometimes at night, she would unfold Caleb's letters again. Read them by candlelight just to remember that someone had once wanted her. But even that comfort had begun to sour. The ink faded, the promises dulled by reality. There were nights she considered burning them, not in rage, but as a kind of offering, as if their ashes might feed the stove better than hope ever had. Then, one morning, in the weak gray light just before dawn, she found it. A single wooden spoon, hand-carved, lying gently across the table where the letters had sat the night before. It wasn't ornate, but it was sanded smooth, with a curve perfectly molded to a woman's grip. No note, no explanation. She picked it up slowly, turning it in her palm like a question. It wasn't love. It wasn't even kindness. But it was care. And in that house, in that season of long silences and longer shadows, even that felt like a door left slightly ajar. The thaw came not in a rush, but in a slow, deliberate surrender. Snow receded from the fields in ragged patches, revealing dark, damp earth beneath. The wind softened, carrying hints of lilac and sun-warmed pine. For the first time since Anna arrived, the air no longer bit. It breathed. She planted daisies by Caleb's grave one morning in early April. The soil was still stubborn, but she worked it loose with her hands, ignoring the ache in her knees. There were no words, no prayers, just silence, and the firm pressing of roots into dirt. It wasn't grief she felt anymore. It was gratitude, not for what could have been, but for what hadn't been taken further. Caleb had offered her a door, even if he hadn't lived to open it. Back at the house, she took to baking pies in the cool of the morning. Apple, rhubarb, cherry, whatever she could barter or grow. The crusts were neat, the edges crimped like her grandmother used to do. By mid-May, she was selling them in town, her name slowly becoming more than a passing curiosity. The whispers stopped. In their place came nods, and soon after, smiles. At the Mercantile, the shopkeeper called her Miss Foster, without irony. One girl even asked if she taught stitching. Elijah remained a man of few words, but his silences had shifted. He came home from the fields before dark, boots heavy with mud, shoulders ringed with sweat. He sat at the table now, not just to eat, but to stay. Some evenings, he lingered longer than the food lasted, listening as Anna spoke about trivial things. A misbehaving pie crust, a hawk nesting near the well. He rarely responded, but he listened, and that, she had learned, was its own kind of speech. One afternoon, she found him seated in the barn, Caleb's last letter open in his lap. His brow was furrowed, his thumb moving slowly over a corner of the page like it was something alive. "I see why he liked you," he said, not looking up. "You write like people can still be good." Anna leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "Only because sometimes they are." No more was said. But the next day, the porch swing, long broken, half hanging by a rusted chain, had been repaired. She found Elijah sitting there at dusk, hat in his lap, eyes on the horizon. He didn't ask her to join him, but when she sat, he didn't move away. The wood creaked beneath them. The sky turned soft with lavender and flame. They said nothing, but something spoke between them. Quiet, steady, like roots moving beneath thawed soil. Not love, not yet. but something that could grow. The planting festival arrived with the kind of warmth that didn't just settle in the air. It seeped into people's bones, loosening shoulders and softening faces. June in Montana painted everything in gold. Wheatgrass swayed in the fields like dancers themselves, and the sun lingered longer than usual, as if reluctant to let go of the day. The town square had been strung with ribbons and bunting, tables groaning under the weight of pies, stews, and jars of lemonade that glistened with condensation. Anna stood at the edge of it all, her hands smoothing the front of her dress, pale green cotton, with the neat hem and sunflower pin she'd stitched herself by lantern light. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers. It fit not just her frame, but the life she was finally allowing herself to believe in. Elijah approached from behind with the careful steps of a man still learning how to take up space. He'd traded his usual worn flannel for a clean white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. The stiffness in his shoulders betrayed the discomfort he felt, not with her, but with the attention they might draw. He stood beside her like a man uncertain of the rules, but determined to follow whatever ones she chose to write. The fiddles started low, then rose, bright and full of invitation. A circle formed in the dirt, boots tapping, skirts twirling. Elijah turned toward her and held out his hand, palm open, fingers steady. She looked at it like it was a cliff's edge. "I don't dance," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the music. "Neither do I," he said, with a smile that pulled from deep beneath his usual stillness. "Let's be terrible together." Their first steps were clumsy, not from misstep, but from hesitation. But no one watched them with laughter. No one whispered. The world, for a brief and extraordinary moment, made room for them. Just them. Two souls scarred by pasts they hadn't chosen, daring to build something that wasn't owed to them, but was theirs nonetheless. Later, beneath the sycamore trees lit with paper lanterns, Elijah handed her a box worn at the corners. She opened it slowly. Caleb's letters lay inside, still bound by the same blue string. She traced her fingers over the paper, felt the weight of what once was, and of what she no longer needed. "I think it's time you stopped living for the words of a dead man," Elijah said softly. Beneath the letters was a gold band, simple, smooth, and quiet in its promise. Anna looked up, her throat tightening as tears stung her eyes. "You waited," she said. He nodded, his voice nearly a whisper, "and I'd wait again." They weren't young, they weren't new, but what they had was real, not promised, not planned, but chosen.